Joining us live from Busan is Dr. Robert Edwin Kelly, American political analyst and a professor at Busan National University. Good afternoon. Thank you for being with us. Now, Kim Jong Un has pushed for a self-sufficient economy. Will you explain this for us? And is this as a feeling of more economic pressure due to the COVID-19 pandemic, or is this in response more to the rising tensions with South Korea?
Well, North Korea has always been sort of a communist or sort of semi-socialist economy. It's not really very communist anymore, of course. It's more sort of corrupt, really. But, North Korea has always sort of pursued autarky or sort of internal economic development without relying on trade very much. Part of this is because North Korea doesn't have very much to trade. It doesn't really produce a great deal that the world wants to import, and so the North Koreans are forced to sort of make a lot of things themselves domestically. As you mentioned in the report, the sanctions just make this problem worse, right? There are both UN sanctions and then bilateral sanctions from lots of countries around North Korea, including China. Even North Korea's economic relationship with the world goes through China. And so the North Koreans are constantly, North Korean political statements constantly stress this, right? That North Koreans have to find their own internal solutions and things like that. And there's really sort of no choice. They'd have to give up nuclear weapons to have a normalized economic relationship with the rest of the world, and they're probably not going to do that. So I think Kim Jong Un is sort of setting the course for the years, maybe even decades to come.
Right. And as you've said, the North Korean economy is very weak. Standard of living is very low.
Right.
Kim has said that he wants to improve the standard of living. How does he propose to do this?
Yeah, this is actually sort of a big debate, right? How can he actually do this if he doesn't repair relationships with the rest of the world? Probably the most important thing he could do is sort of not run the economy with so much corruption and cronyism and nepotism and the rest as his father did. His father really ran the economy right into the ground. He devoted huge resources to the military, which starved the civilian sector, particularly agriculture. One benefit to having nuclear weapons is that the North Koreans don't have to have a gigantic conventional military budget anymore, because now they have nukes as sort of a shield, if you will. And so that should free up some resources to put into the weaker sectors. Again, I think agriculture is probably the biggie, just to make sure that the people in North Korea can eat enough. Something like 40% of North Koreans are sort of on the verge, or in sort of like chronic semi-malnutrition. They're sort of frequently on the verge of malnutrition. And so that's really the key, right? And the reason is not because suddenly the North Korean elite cares about its population. It's because if you have a population that's on the verge of starvation on a regular basis, at some point you might have food riots and challenges to the regime.
Right. Dr. Kelly, one more thing. At this meeting, nobody, including Kim, was wearing any face masks. What do we make of this in face of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, I think that's probably for the same reason that Donald Trump doesn't wear a face mask, because it's a sort of symbol of strength and stuff like that, or sort of perceived as a symbol of strength and things like that. I think particularly for the rest of the world, where everybody's kind of terrified that COVID is sort of like spreading like wildfire in North Korea, it doesn't really have the hospital or medical capacity to respond to it if it really does sort of explode at the grassroots, which has been the fear, I think, for the last 6 months. And so even if there is COVID in the North, which we really don't know, right, Kim probably doesn't want to wear the mask. Kim and his associates don't want to wear the mask, because that would signal to us on the outside that this is a problem, and then we might all, sort of worry about North Korea even more. So that they're wearing masks doesn't actually tell us a great deal about the state, or excuse me, that they're not wearing masks doesn't actually tell us a great deal about the state of COVID-19 in North Korea.
Right. Thank you very much for joining us. That was Dr. Robert Edwin Kelly joining us live for the latest on North Korea. He's an American political analyst and professor at Busan National University. And moving on to our next story, Minneapolis City Council has voted to dismantle and defund the city's police department following the brutal killing of George Floyd. The council has also recommended that the city adopt a community policing model, despite strong opposition from the mayor himself. 9 members of the Minneapolis City Council announced that they intend to end the city's policing in its current form and rebuild a new model for public safety. With 9 votes, the council, which enjoys veto-proof supermajority, made its announcement as protests stretched into its 13th day across the U.S.
Our commitment is to do what's necessary to keep every single member of our community safe, and to tell the truth that the Minneapolis police are not doing that. Our commitment is to end our city's toxic relationship with the Minneapolis Police Department, to end policing as we know it, and to recreate systems of public safety that actually keep us safe.
Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, who stood in opposition to the idea of dismantling the police department, was heckled by a huge crowd of protesters. The protesters had marched to the mayor's residence demanding the removal of funding for the Minneapolis Police Department.
If you're asking whether I'm willing to do everything I possibly can throughout the rest of my term to make sure that the police union, the police contract, the arbitration system, and some of these policies that have resulted in problems specifically for black and brown people, and murder, by the way, over a series of generations, I'm all for that. I'm not for abolishing the entire police department, and I'll be honest about that too.
After days of protests, President Trump has ordered the National Guard to start the process of withdrawing from Washington, D.C. Earlier, around 5,000 National Guard personnel were deployed across 11 states to ensure peace as protests over brutal killing of George Floyd took a violent turn. However, Trump's tweet did not specify whether all National Guard forces would be withdrawn or it would just be out-of-state troops that would be leaving. Meanwhile, in New York City, Mayor Bill de Blasio announced that the city would be lifting curfew spurred by violent protests against police brutality ahead of its schedule. Just more than 2 hours after the curfew had passed, thousands of demonstrators continued to march in Manhattan and Brooklyn. It is day 13 of the protests. It is day 13 of the protests, and demonstrators continue to gather in large numbers demanding justice for George Floyd. Despite experts' concerns about coronavirus spread, the crowds are seen defying social distancing rules, decrying police brutality and white supremacist ideology.